Eurovision, a music contest that may make you question the sanity of an entire continent. Well, actually, technically, maybe 2 now. 3 if you think about it. Anyway, let's jump into this. Roll that intro. Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Welcome back to another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week, yes, we are going to talk about Eurovision. A quick comment question of the week. For those of you who have seen Eurovision before, what is your favorite song and act of all time? Bonus points if you know which year it was from. For those of you who may not necessarily know what Eurovision is, it is basically a European song contest that is almost like the Olympics for music, for pop music. Although maybe not always pop, but generally speaking, we'll call it pop music. It originally came about after World War II in an effort to try and help bring the European community together through music. And even though many people around the world had never heard about it, there are many music artists which have competed and or won the competition, including ABBA, Celine Dion, and a number of others. Even for those outside of Italy, their first exposure to Måneskin was in Eurovision itself. They had already been picking up some steam in the years before in Italy, but there are a number of music artists who weren't necessarily known on a global scale before their exposure to the Eurovision audience. It's something that I can say I remember quite clearly. The first time that I ever saw it, it was like yesterday. In 2008, I was in the Black Forest in Germany. But to drop the act, yes, I was in the Black Forest in Germany in 2008, and I just happened to find it by accident. I was flipping through the channels. I was stuck in my hotel room dealing with seasonal allergies. Because, of course, for someone with seasonal allergies, the Black Forest in Germany is a wonderful place to be during allergy season. Notice the not-so-subtle sarcasm. And so anyway, I'm stuck in this hotel room and flipping through the channels. Everything, of course, is in German. I did watch one Arnold Schwarzenegger partially in German before I kind of gave up. Then I happened to come up and find this music contest. First, it was one music artist that was playing. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then another one came on, and they were each from a different country. And I thought that was the coolest thing. That year, I don't remember how many artists were performing in their native languages, but I kept noticing that there was a lot of different music with a different feel to it in different languages. I'll never forget probably my favorite act from that year, Mor ve Ötesi from Turkey, their song Deli. Loved that for years. It was at a point where I was a little bit more into rock, and to hear something and be exposed to that from a different part of the world it just blew my mind. I absolutely loved it. And that's something that I can say that I really have enjoyed over the years about Eurovision. I don't watch every year, but this year I have watched both the first semifinal and second semifinal. I will plan to watch the third semifinal. That will be the night after this episode comes out. And you can watch it live on YouTube. That's something that's been really great that you didn't have possible back in the day, in air quotes. It's really cool because also when you're watching it on a local broadcaster, sometimes the quality may not be the best visually. And then also they'll often have an announcer speaking over the entire time. So even when you see the hosts on stage, you'll have someone in another language talking because it's always done in English. But on YouTube, everything is basically in English. Sometimes they'll stick in little bits and pieces from the host country's native language just here and there, but generally speaking, it's the predominant language is English and some French, which for me personally is interesting to see as a remnant of an older era where French was kind of the international lingua franca, whereas now English is kind of the international language, so to speak. But I love seeing certain acts when they are able to perform in their own language. And not only do I love when the artists are able to perform in their native language, but also when they can add some traditional sounds to their modern music, or even maybe a little bit of an older fashioned style, seeing how that can be brought into the modern age, not necessarily redoing it, but there have been some acts throughout the years that have been able to do that. But why did I say it's a song competition that may make you question the sanity of an entire continent, or now technically 3, because Australia actually in the past years has become a part of the competition, big fan base there, and so now they're included. But because of the time difference and it happens live, that's actually another really big aspect of this, is that everything is live on the spot. Even a number of years ago, there was someone who ran onto the stage when Spain was performing, but because of that and he interrupted the performance, they actually let the Spanish contestant do their song over again. The reason why I say it may make you question the sanity is because you see some really whacked out things on this competition. I'm not going to go into detail about all of my opinions on why I would say that, but you're going to see things that while you're watching are just going to make you go like, wait, hold on, what just happened? I mean, even this year, a group of fully grown men in tighty whities performing on stage. Well, although I will say very carefully, it's 2023, so I'm not going to assume men, but we'll just use that as the gendered term in this situation. I'd assume it's a safe bet, though. But there are some really interesting songs that come up, and I have been introduced to certain artists through this competition. Or what's really cool is when you start kind of doing research on your own or traveling and getting introduced to different music artists yourself and finding them on your own, and then eventually coming to find them on Eurovision. That's really exciting to see. Or even seeing maybe an acquaintance of yours on the competition or as part of one of the acts. It's really fun to see. Actually, a former client of mine ended up being one of the interim acts a number of years ago. I won't go into who they were, what they did, but it's just, I was like, oh, I know that guy. I met that guy. I filmed that guy. That's so cool to see. This person was super talented and really deserved to get featured. Whatever. I'm not going to go into everything, but, or like I said, maybe you get introduced to a particular band or music artist or whatever through your travels, and then they end up on Eurovision. That actually was another thing that I thought was so cool. There was a Turkish band that I found by chance when I was in Turkey a number of years ago visiting, called Manga. The next year or the year after, they ended up on Eurovision, and I had already been a fan of theirs by then. They make some great music. I was a little disappointed to hear them performing in English. I think it was We Could Be the Same, but it was still really cool to see that because I was like, oh wow, this is really awesome. They're kind of like a Turkish Linkin Park, I guess you could say. But it's also interesting to get to see the little bit of cultural influence or the little bit of the culture that ends up coming out one way or the other. Like this year, Finland's entry into the competition, I would have not expected anything less from a Finnish entry. It's probably at the peak of what I would think of being a Finnish Eurovision entry. This guy starts his song inside of a wooden crate, and you think it's industrial metal of some kind, and then it goes into techno, and then all of a sudden he's happy cha-cha-chaing his way down the stage. Sometimes you will see things on this competition that will impress you. Sometimes you will see things that make you horrified, or other things that make you laugh and say, yeah, that fits. I feel as though the only unfortunate thing is as time goes on, I feel like I'm seeing more and more music in English. And coming from an English-speaking country, yeah, it's cool that I get to understand what they're saying. And yeah, in the international community, like people are connecting more with the lyrics. But at the same time, I like hearing the soul of what the country has to say. I mean, there are certain countries that you just will always hear them singing, or almost always hear them singing in their language, their original language, and are doing so almost unapologetic. Like France, I can't even remember the last time I've heard them speak in English. Granted, I don't listen to them every year, so maybe they did a song in the past few years that I missed. Spain, I think, often does their songs in Spanish, and Portugal often does theirs in Portuguese. But again, these are things where you capture a little bit of the soul. And I think this was something that I really respected about Måneskin, that when they performed in Eurovision, even though they do a lot of music in English, they actually performed in Italian to give a little bit more of the soul of the country. Not necessarily that it's representative of Italy, even though a lot of Italians do love them. It represented something just innate to Italy, and that's the language. Okay, Italy, you can start getting into the conversation that, yes, there's many languages, and Italian is not necessarily everybody's native tongue, or that it's not going to necessarily be the language that is most representative of all of the different regions, but it is probably the language, not probably, it is the language that connects all the different languages and all the different dialects together, that when two people don't speak the same dialect, they're probably going to communicate in Italian. Anyway, that gets into a totally different discussion, but you get into those little possibilities to start thinking about and to start exploring. And if you find a music artist, you can start going through more of their music, and that might lead you to something else from that country. I can say usually there are certain countries that I do prefer the music from, especially when they go in a more traditional direction. Like this year, for example, Albania's song in Albanian, I mean, that was really cool to see. Also, to see that kind of family aspect to come together, I think that's really nice to see. And also Slovenia also did it in their language. That was also really fun to see. But you do sometimes see something in Eurovision that when you find one group that wins, that Other times you'll see bands or individual acts start kind of replicating things. Like there's a lot of really manufactured music here. So I'm not going to say you're going to find amazing music. I'm not going to say you're going to find the top next indie artist. No, you're going to find an interesting array of Eurovision music. Eurovision music, I could say, is probably its own genre, but that might cover a number of different genres. And something that you sometimes see in Eurovision is that when one country wins, that you will see other countries try to emulate certain aspects, or when something really carries on, like the epic sax man, that meme that was just popular for ages, that came from Eurovision. And now from time to time, you will see that some acts, even there was one act this year that had a saxophone, that they tried to incorporate something. And that's not the first time since the Epic Sax Man was originally on that kind of started to become a little bit of a thing. And even this year, I've already talked about Måneskin before, but there are a few acts this year that I might argue have a bit of an influence from that specific act, from that specific winner, including even San Marino to an extent, but that gets into a whole different thing. So I'm just going to round out this episode here. So thank you all so much for watching this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. An even bigger thank you to those of you who support this by helping to make this project possible on a monthly basis through Patreon or the one-time donations, such as the thanks button on YouTube. All greatly helps this project to be able to continue. So thank you all so much. Of course, thank you as well for sharing this with your friends, for liking and taking part in the conversation down below in the comment section here on YouTube. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there. This has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and I will see you all next time. Later.